The Nexus Arrangement is a device that can block all warp power from travel to the use of psychic energy within an area the size of a planet plus. Who did it belong to? Why do they want it back? And how are the word bearers using it? Friends, let's find out, and welcome to another 40k video. The word bearers have been using it to hurt the Imperium by blocking their ability to send ships to the area that they have invaded using the warp. And the word bearers are on the verge of victory. It's then the master of this device, the Undying One, awakens and calls to it to return to him. And the silver orb, the Nexus Arrangement, moved. It punched its way clear of the Crucius Maledictus, moving at tremendous speed, tearing clean through a metre-thick bulkheads and countless levels of decking. It ripped straight through everything in its path, causing untold damage. It rent a gaping hole through the engine deck, coming within scant centimetres of penetrating the plasma core. And then, with a streaking tail of fire arcing out behind it, the silver sphere hurtled down through the atmosphere of Boros Prime like a shooting star. Moving at such velocity, were it to strike the surface of Boros Prime, it would cause a crater tens of kilometres wide, but before it struck it came to a sudden halt. Its velocity arrested instantly. Glowing with pale light, it hovered between the Undying One's outstretched hands. The brilliant light of the Nexus Arrangement reflected sharply off the metallic body of the Undying One. The silver sphere spun impossibly fast, hovering steadily between the ancient being's elongated fingertips, which tapered to curving needle-like nails. It caressed the air around the device, fingers moving like the legs of some metallic arachnid, and it tilted its head to one side as it spun, as if captivated by the device. For untold millennia, the Undying One had been trapped within the prison of its crypt. So long had it been confined that the heavens it now looked upon were strange and unfamiliar. 1 billion new suns had been born since the time of its imprisonment, and tens of thousands had burnt out, becoming lifeless, wasted hulks, or light-sucking black holes. Everywhere it saw the taint of the old ones, their engineered young races were spread across the universe in a venomous tide. Hatred cold and ancient burned within its cavernous heart. Now released, it would take up the old fight, and finish would have been started millions of years ago. With a slow, deliberate movement, the Undying One drew the Nexus Arrangement into its chest. The centre of the sun disk, emblazoned upon its breastplate, sunk inwards, forming a half-moon depression, and the spinning device slotted neatly into place. The Undying One's body was jolted with the force of the connection, its metal spine curving backwards violently and its head thrown back. A patina of shimmering iridescence rippled across its metallic limbs, and a web of intricate golden lines, burning with hot light, crept across its every surface, delicate labyrinthine veins forming, shifting, geometric patterns across its silver metal skin. The solid silver orb, embedded within its chest, seemed to blur, its seamless surface melting and reforming to become a series of delicate rings arranged around a miniature green-hued sun. Those rings began to spin around each other, liquid metal rotating faster and faster. The glowing sun at its centre seemed to swell, spilling light outwards in a blinding wave, and as the Undying One threw out its hands, the Nexus Arrangement began to operate as its creator had intended, and a psychic black hole was torn open. Across the continents of Boros Prime, unaugmented men and Astartes reeled as the effects of the Nexus Arrangement washed over them. Many of them fell to their knees, gasping as a terrible aching pain clutched at the very fibres of their being. It felt as though their souls were being wrenched from their bodies and cast into the abyss, leaving them empty and hollow, mere shells. A terrible, all-pervading pall of utter futility descended upon Boros Prime, affecting even the most fervent and strong-willed individuals. Millions of soldiers and civilians simply gave up, their will to fight fading, their will to even live deserting them. And this reminds me of what the Necrons have been able to do recently in the Prior Nexus. Some men and women who moments before had been fighting for their lives dropped their weapons and sank to the ground, a fuge of hopelessness overcoming them. With haunted, unfocused eyes, they stared into the distance, oblivious, or simply not caring about what was occurring around them. Others turned their weapons on themselves, unable to live with this gut-wrenching emptiness in their souls. Tens of thousands were slaughtered by the merciless Necron warriors, marching steadily through the streets, gunning down every living creature that they encountered, whether they resisted or not. It was a harvest of sickening proportions. The streets were awash with blood and mutilated corpses, and several limbs were scattered about like discarded toys. Those with the strongest warp presence suffered the worst. Blood clots blossomed within the minds of Imperial astropaths, and the sanctioned psykers attached to the command sections of the Boros Guard, and they collapsed to the ground, their bodies racked with violent convulsions, screaming incoherently at their souls being torn apart from their fragile bodies. What in the Emperor's name has happened? Breathed Aquilius, clutching at a marble railing for balance. The librarian suffered too much to speak immediately. In concern, Aquilius says, "My lord," and the librarian says, "My powers, they are gone." And just to touch upon a few other effects of it, and then we'll dive back into what happens with the device. In orbit above Boris Prime, the Infidus Diabolus shuddered as if it had been struck with cyclonic torpedoes. It listed heavily to one side, its hull groaning in protest as the demons that had infused its essence since before the outbreak of the heresy were banished. The strike cruiser's central processing cogitator unit sputtered and died. Reliant on the demon essences bound into its mainframe, the ship's thinking computers and hardwired servitors were unable to function as the malicious spirits were driven out. The ship threatened to come apart at the seams, so intrinsic was the warp to its very existence. Aboard the ship, the corrupted Magos, Dariok Grendhal, seemed to shrink, his fleshy, demonic appendages withering and beginning to rot at an accelerated rate as the demon within him was sent screaming back to its plane of existence. Cancers and tumours long held at bay by the infernal spirit that had become a part of the Tech Magos began to bloom, and his life support system began to bleat plaintively. Skinless cathartic demons took flight, but they had barely stretched out their flayed flesh wings before they blinked out of existence, dragged back to their own turbulent realm of chaos. Arachnid-legged demon engines fell lifelessly to the ground, rendered utterly inert, their hulls nothing more than empty shells. The demons bound into their iron skins, dragged into darkness by the power of the Nexus Arrangement. So you can really see the level that this Nexus Arrangement operates on. Basically doing an exorcism on an entire Chaos ship so that it won't function anymore. Now in my mind, why did the Necrons make this? It makes sense to me. It will be a weapon created to fight the Eldari, who were created by the Old Ones, to use the powers of the warp. So this would be a counter move to that. Anyway, let's wrap up the tale with what happens after this point. After this, Marduk, a leader of the Word Bearers, and his anointed lead a force to retrieve the device. It's so crucial to their plans. As he nearly reaches the Undying, he sees the device is within its chest. They fight, and Marduk loses an arm and almost his life. When the Warmonger, a Word-Bearer Dreadnought, joins the fray, the Undying quickly finishes the Dreadnought with a disemboweling stroke, which reveals the sarcophagus within. But with a distraction from Marduk, the Dreadnought takes hold of the Necron with its power talon and squeezes. The Necron burst into many scarabs, and the Nexus Arrangement was left behind amongst the scarab swarm. Kol Badar, a Word-Bearer, gets hold of the device, and the touch of the warp returns when he does, and the Word-Bearers teleport away as the Undying One reforms. The Necron vessel goes after the Word-Bearers, who, from differences of direction, have turned on each other. The Infidus Diabolus launches the Necron device away and destroys it with a vortex grenade, lifting the block on warp travel permanently, allowing the ship to escape to warn Erebus about Kor Pharon's treachery. With the device gone, the Necron's interests end. And on that note, we wrap up today's video. And all of this, just to note, was taken from the third book in the Word Bearers Omnibus, or Trilogy, by Josh Reynolds.